The open-source software model, which relies on the workforce of volunteers, has created a thriving ecosystem of projects in areas such as artificial intelligence, simulation, web browsers, finance, and several others. Making a software project open source means that anyone will be able to look at its source code and make contributions such as opening issues, fixing bugs, developing new functionalities, or even creating new projects using existing software as a starting point. Open source projects have joined Summer of Code programs to increase projects' exposure in the hope of attracting new contributors. Summers of Code are programs that promote software development to open source projects. These programs are usually sponsored by well-known organizations such as Facebook, Google, and Debian. Some examples are Google Summer of Code, Julia Summer of Code, and Rails Girls Summer of Code. We focus on Google Summer of Code, which is a global program focused on bringing more student developers into open-source software development. The program works as follows. Students contact the mentor organizations they want to work with and write a project proposal. If accepted, students spend a month interacting with their organizations prior to the start of coding. Students then have 3 months to code. Mentors and students work together to determine appropriate milestones and requirements for the summer. We found out that students want more than just having the experience of contributing to an open-source project. Often, they also aim for the stipends, building their career portfolio, learning, peer recognition, ideology achievement, intellectual stimulation, fostering interpersonal relationships, academic accomplishments, and having fun. Investigating further, we found differences in motivation, even when the students showed interest in the same outcome. For example, when students indicated they were interested in contributing to open-source projects, some of them were referring to the interaction with mentors and other project members. Other students joined the program for the philosophy and culture that involves contributing to open-source projects. In other cases, the students considered that contributing to open-source projects on their own was too difficult and said that Google Summer of Code would lower entry barriers. Also, some students were interested in the project they would develop during the program. The stipends motivated the students in different ways. For the students who said that the stipends were an essential part of the program, typically needed the stipends as their source of funding, for paying bills, living expenses, or tuition. In some cases, the students considered the stipends as compensation for a provided service. The students who could afford to participate in the program without the stipends typically explained that participation would still be beneficial for the learning that could be used later for better job prospects. In fewer cases, the students were interested in the program because currency conversion provided them with financial gain. Also, when open-source developers were already contributing to the open-source project voluntarily, they entered the program for either financial gain or source of funding. Some students reported entering the program for the fun of creating new features to open-source projects and of interacting with open-source developers. The students were very specific when they reported being interested in what they wanted to learn. Most students aimed at learning real-world software development. A few students said they wanted to improve other skills such as learning a new language. Approximately half of the students reported they would not have entered Google Summer of Code if they could not use participation to build their resumes. The students that did not consider announcing the experience in their resumes essential also explained that their careers would still be benefited for the real-world software development experience. Even though Google Summer of Code does not define itself as an internship, several students entered the program as an alternative to traditional internships. In some cases, students even used participation for obtaining course credits and for developing software that was essential for their research. Surprisingly, students showed little interest in peer recognition, even though the literature shows that it is highly valued among open-source developers. The few students who indicated interest did so for the prestige of the program or to be able to brag among their peers. Students were also interested in developing interpersonal relationships for different reasons. Some students wanted to be part of a community, while others wanted the relationships for sharing knowledge, experiences, and seeking potential contacts for ventures. Intellectual stimulation was an essential motivator for most of the students. In fact, the students considered intellectual stimulation among the most motivating aspect of participating in Google Summer of Code. Also, some students associated intellectual stimulation with meaningful learning, which is typically demanding and challenging. Finally, some students mentioned mentoring as the primary source of their interest, while others wanted to achieve the ideology of contributing to open-source projects to the greater good or to give back to the community. Several students see the outcomes previously presented as rewards. Thus, students contribute to open-source projects for a blend of rewards. For a lot of students, if rewards were not offered, we speculate that they would not have contributed to the open-source projects at all. We also found out that the students' interest to participate in Google Summer of Code was affected by their level of knowledge and skills, and by external events such as their colleagues' influence. The literature typically uses the concept of motivation instead of interest to explain the behavior of open-source contributors. We found out that students' motivation may change in two ways as they contribute to the projects. In the first, students' motivation increase when they feel they need to increase their knowledge and skills. For example, students with 2 to 3 years of development experience were more likely to be motivated by career concerns, while students with more than 10 years of development experience were not. In the second, students may assimilate projects' culture and values and contribute voluntarily to the projects. However, the dominant force that motivated most participation in Google Summer of Code was the pursuit of rewards other than contributing to open-source projects. A noteworthy exception was the developers, who already were contributors to open-source projects, who entered Google Summer of Code to dedicate time and efforts to their projects. We believe that contributing to open-source projects may lead to a shift in some students' disposition to contribute voluntarily. By coding with the assistance of a mentor and sharing the experience in a blog, students get feedback, which is an essential component for learning, and the opportunity for internalizing the project's community's values, which is crucial in contributing to the projects voluntarily. We conclude by presenting a figure that depicts the concepts presented in this video.